Hey everyone, welcome to the SQL Server segment of the PowerShell 10th anniversary party. My name is Chrissy Lemaire. I am a Cloud and Data Center Management MVP, and I'm here with Aaron Nelson, who is a Data Platform MVP. Now, in this session, we'll be talking about the SQL Server community news, past, present, and future. And 2016 has been a really incredible year for SQL Server and PowerShell. And in order to underscore just how significant this year has been, I'm going to give you a brief history of SQL Server and PowerShell. So the first release came in August of 2008. It provided a mini shell and a snap-in and 5 commands plus the SQL Server provider. And it looked like this. So if you'll notice, it is a mini shell. It's an exe. It's not a module. And the mini shell was found by the community to be restrictive and buggy. And after a public outcry, Jeffrey Snover let the community know, hey, this isn't the fault of the SQL Server team. I suggested that they use it, and it just didn't quite work out the way that we had hoped. Now, the SQL PS module actually had issues of its own. As you can see here, it did use unapproved verbs, and the reason is because it kind of modeled itself after the SQL PS mini shell, which actually didn't check for approved verbs. With the third release came 45 commands total. There were 12 new, but the issues with SQL PS still persisted. When we look at this again, we can also see that it changed the directory to the SQL Server provider, which is unexpected behavior from modules. And what you don't see here is that it actually takes up to 5 seconds to load. In addition, tab completion didn't work. Invoke SQL CMD was buggy, and what if actually performed the commands. Also, other platforms were offering 700 plus commandlets. So you had Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business offering over 700 commands, and we were still at only 45. So the SQL community wasn't so happy with this module. The responses ranged from sad to resigned to super upset, and people felt that Microsoft was unresponsive and the commands were random, they were few, there were no basic commands like get SQL login, and the bugs were never or rarely fixed. So in response, the community created its own modules and commands. In 2007, Power SAS was released. In 2008, the wildly popular SQL PSX was released that had a number of basic commands. In 2009, SSRS PowerShell Provider was released. In 2011, Spade, which was an automated installation engine, was debuted. And in 2015, DBA Tools, which focuses on migrations and best practices, was debuted. But these were all just filling in the gaps for what Microsoft was not providing. But let me tell you that 2016 has been an amazing year, and this slide celebrates that with beer and fries as we do in Belgium. So 2016 is the year of the SQL Client Tools Renaissance, as Microsoft calls it. And here you can see Ken Van Heining, the engineering manager for SQL Server Client Tools. He explained that a few years back, the SQL organization needed many of the engineers in the team to go and help with the Azure SQL database. And that included a lot of them from the tools team. And that had an obvious impact on their ability to do anything significant in the SQL Client Tools space as a whole. Now that includes not only PowerShell, but SQL Server Management Studio as well. Then Ken followed up by saying that they've been reinvesting in the tools and that he is leading the SQL Client Tools Renaissance. Now, Microsoft has become much more open in communicating their issues, and it's everything has genuinely changed. So first, the SQL Server team hired a dedicated PowerShell engineer, and Microsoft began taking the connect items, which are suggestions and bug reports, seriously. So seriously, in fact, that I actually created a Twitter bot called Closed is Fixed that keeps track of them because everything is being closed or resolved as fixed. The next thing was that the SQL PS module was renamed to SQL Server, and this allowed Microsoft to do regular releases, which were initially called monthly releases, but they found that it wasn't just monthly. Sometimes they were doing it twice a month. So now they're just calling it regular releases. In addition, by changing the name, they are working to separate from SQL Server Management Studio so that they can put this module directly in the PowerShell gallery. So the SQL Client Tools Renaissance is genuinely a renaissance. Nowadays, the SQL Server team directly interacts with the community, and they do this not just on Microsoft technology, so it's not just on Yammer. There's also the SQL Server Trello boards. There is the SQL Server Community Slack and also Twitter. And what's really amazing is that upvoting also counts during this renaissance. So if you are on the Trello board and you're upvoting, those commands will get created. And let me tell you that so many new commands have been created. Now, this is just since July. On the right, we have the company directive that's always encrypted, but on the left, that is all the result of the community. So Microsoft saw all of these upvotes. They heard what we said was important to us as DBAs and developers, and they created that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Aaron so that he can tell you how to help design the SQL PowerShell module. Aaron?
Thanks, Chrissy. I'm going to take you on a tour of the SQL Community Trello board. First up, to get there, go to sqlps.io/vote. We chose that URL to emphasize that we need community participation in order to make this Trello board work. We have a lot of commands that the SQL team needs to get built into SQL Server, and we need your help in voting to help prioritize for them which ones would impact your day the most so that they can build those commands first. I want to emphasize that this board is open to anyone. If you have a Trello account already, you can come in here and start voting and commenting on cards right away. To vote, just open up a card like this, add SQL database user. That's a commandlet that I'd like to have. So click the vote button and there you go. You can also comment on these cards right down here, even without joining the board. If you want to suggest your own commandlet that's not on the board yet, just come over here to this first list, find the card about the founding members, or pretty much anyone on this list, and just comment and say, hey, add me to the board. We'll go ahead and do that as soon as we can. So let me give you a fast overview on the organization of this board. First up, in the second column, we've got the wins. These are things that have been added to the SQL PowerShell module since the release of SQL Server 2016 earlier this year. One of my favorite ones is output as, which allows you to take a SQL query that you're running in invoke SQL command and output it as a data row, a data table, or a data set. This is important, and I'll describe why it's important a little more when we talk about write SQL table data. At the same time that came out, in July, we also got get SQL error log. Now, get SQL error log was based on community feedback that was submitted by, well, a lot of people actually. We all kind of had the idea. But community member Nick Kane decided to volunteer some of his code out of his production environment, took it out, cleaned it up, took out all the unnecessary parts for us to see, and gave the SQL Power engineer, Matteo, a roadmap of what a user is expecting for basic functionality of a get SQL error log commandlet. Speaking of Matteo, that's him right here. He's the SQL PowerShell engineer on the SQL Server Tools team. He's the guy that can make your dreams come true. So if you're supporting a commandlet or asking for an additional parameter on a commandlet and you see him chime in, now you know you're talking straight to the guy who can make it happen. In addition to that, after the get SQL error log commandlet came out, community member Drew Burgewell had some additional feedback and some ideas of how to make it better. It's a great start, but there were some additional things that he wanted to see. Drew had a lot of ideas, and so instead of just putting in various comments in the board, he decided to go ahead and write a whole blog post about his ideas to be able to share them with the community and then linked it from the board. Drew's suggestions, they even go so far as to suggest using run spaces to be able to multi-thread and get more results faster from multiple SQL instances. You can see Drew put 200 lines of code together for this sample, and shared it with the whole community to use. Now, obviously, you can go ahead and use that code today if it helps you, but hopefully one day Matteo will have time to put that into the product if it makes sense. We also have the get SQL agent commandlets, as well as get, add, and remove SQL login commandlets. I'll cover more of these later. One last thing I want to touch on before we go is this show menu over here. First off, you can see the community members that are participating in the board up here. If you scroll down, it'll give you a list of all the comments that have been made on all the various cards in reverse chronological order. This keeps it so that you don't have to go looking all across the board to see what people are talking about. You can just come to this list and see what's going on. It even gives you a handy mark to pick up where you left off last. If you'd be interested in having DSC with SQL Server, there's a card for that on this board. In addition, there are a couple commands that even if you're not a SQL Server person by day, you'd probably like to have them just in case you need to export a SQL schema or maybe change the configuration on some of your machines. Thank you for letting me take the time to show you around our board. We hope you'll find it valuable, and we invite you to vote, comment, and create cards with commands that would be useful to you. Next up, I'm going to show you some demos of the commandlets that we've created as a result of the interaction on this board. Now let's take a look at some of the commandlets produced by all that community feedback this year. First up, we'll take a look at the get SQL agent job commandlets. As you know, there can be more than one SQL agent on a machine. We're going to take a look at the default one on my machine and just take a look at all the jobs right now. I'm going to use the out grid view to be able to display it. And as you can see, here's the full list of my jobs, just like I would see them inside of SQL Management Studio. You can pass multiple instance names to the get SQL agent job commandlet and be able to get them from multiple machines all at once. Another thing that you can do is that you can filter down the results of those jobs and look for things like only the jobs that are enabled, or where the last outcome was failed, or both. Let's take a look at that and see if we get any results. Sure enough, my fancy import job has crashed. This commandlet comes with some cool features that Matteo decided to add to it. You can look at just the job history from the last month, the last week, since midnight, or since yesterday. Going back to that command where I only looked for the jobs that were enabled and had failed, I can get that from one machine by just passing in the server instance, or I can pass in a comma-separated list of them, or, optionally, I can use my registered servers file or central management server and query that directly in PowerShell, get that list, and then iterate through that list to get all of the failed SQL agent jobs on this machine. Here I'm just selecting which machines I would like to interrogate. Select these two, and here we go. The fancy import job has failed, and so has the fancy export job on the other instance. Next up, we'll take the SQL logins. Now, the get SQL login commandlet came out back in August, and in September they added the add SQL login commandlet. Turns out the add SQL login commandlet won't directly accept pipeline input, but as it turns out, if you place it inside of a for each loop, you can actually pass down logins from one machine to another, or in this case, one instance to another. Let's take a look at what that might look like. Here, I'm going to get the logins from one machine and then compare them against the logins for another machine using the compare-object commandlet. And then I'll be able to select the ones that I want to move from one instance to the other. Here's my list of logins that I haven't moved over just yet. I can select any of these, multiples of these, and then I can come over here and click on the OK button in the corner, and that'll send them down the pipeline and out of them to the other instance. Again, the pipeline functionality isn't working on add SQL login yet, but hopefully that'll get added in a future release of that commandlet. In the meantime, I'd like to point out that you could use the DBA Tools copy SQL login function available from that tool set in the PowerShell gallery. Next, we'll take a look at getting the SQL error log. Now, I've had a lot of memory errors on my machine lately, and maybe I want to parse through them and take a look at them, but I'm a SQL person, so I want to look at them in a table. I can use the get SQL error log commandlet to pull back the entire error log for the last month, and then pass it to out grid view so I can do some sorting and filtering. From there, I'm going to want to be able to store those results into a table in SQL Server. I'm going to be able to put it into my dbo.memory errors table, but since it doesn't exist yet, I'll need to use the -force parameter to have it be created on the fly. Let's have a look. First up, again, here's the entire error log. What I might be interested in is probably a subset of the entire error log, like just the memory errors. So I'm going to just filter it down using the built-in out grid view functionality to just memory errors. I can see that everything on this page has the word memory somewhere in there. I'm going to scroll to the right and show you that you can also see the server instance name, so that if you had pulled this over from multiple instances, you'd be able to see all of the results from all of those instances. Click OK. Wait for a few seconds. It'll go and grab all those rows of data, transform them into SQL Server rows, and stick them into the table for me. Now, of course, being a DBA, I'd want to not trust that it did work. I want to go verify it. So I'll fire off another command and have a look at that table. Sure enough, 105 rows right there. And if I want to see the contents of it, just go ahead and use select star inside of PowerShell from the out variable object that I created, and I can see the results right there. And for the last demo, I want to show you some functionality using the output as parameter from invoke SQL command that was added earlier this year. I'm going to be running some queries, and I'm going to output the output as data rows. This is important for the next command in the sequence to be able to use that input as a data row instead of just an array as it had been produced by the version earlier this year. In this demo, I'm just walking through a basic troubleshooting scenario where I might be experiencing memory pressure on a server, and I want to find out what databases are using up the most memory on that server. I go ahead and kick this off and output the results to out grid view. I can see right away, at this particular moment, the airstats database is taking up the most space on the server, 88% in fact. So I want to investigate that further. I would like to see the objects inside that database in the buffer pool right now. So I click OK, and it fires off the next command in the sequence. This command is going to go and search all of the objects in the buffer pool in that database for me. Tally them up and give me a list. Here's that list. I can see it's sorted with the largest one on top, and I can see that this particular index is taking up a lot of room in the buffer pool. So next command in the sequence is going to allow me to look at all of the queries currently in the cache that have that index somewhere in it. Click OK. It goes off and thinks for a while, searches for these in the cache, and then brings them up for me. Turns out right now there are two queries. One of them might be the one that's causing all this RAM to be used up by the buffer pool for this index. My next logical step would probably be to take this over to SQL Management Studio and start the troubleshooting, but this is a PowerShell demo, so we'll stop there. One last thing that I want to show you, it's basically the same scenario all over again, but us being data people, we like to see things visually very frequently. So I've leaned on PowerShell MVP BoProx to make some updates to a function that he had for creating squarified tree maps. So I'm going to go through that same scenario one more time, but this time I'm going to get visual results. Here, I've got a tree map telling me that my airstats database is taking up all the RAM in my buffer pool. the coloring could be something different. Right now it's just scaled based on what's taking up the most amount of space, but it could be duration of objects being in the buffer pool or something like that. I'm going to click through on the name of this database to go and see the objects in that database that are in the buffer pool, just like I did on the previous demo. Again, it's going to go off and run that query, return its results as a .NET data table, and then be ready for this one. So here, pretty obvious. I don't know if you can see it exactly. There's a little line of green and everything else is red. So, hey, there's your problem. Click on that. We go back and get our results again, and it will be the same two queries. The reason I show you that is I want you to start thinking of the power and capabilities that you have from getting results from multiple servers and being able to throw them into a chart, a graph, a tree map at once inside of PowerShell without ever having to leave. Eventually, you may want to take your results out of PowerShell and stick them into a SQL Server table. These are the features that are now available to you in SQL Server Management Studio 16.5 and above. I hope this gets you thinking about something that you can use in your environment to help you in your everyday tasks. Thanks for joining us. Chrissy?
Hey, thanks, man. That was awesome. So something else that we wanted to show you was the SQL Server Community Slack. And what's so cool about that is that Microsoft is actually there. So it's MVPs, it is DBAs, developers, Microsoft themselves. And the way that you get to the SQL Community Slack, which also has a couple PowerShell channels, is you go to sqlps.io/Slack. And you enter your email address here, you check it, and then you join. Now this is what it looks like whenever you join the Slack channel. And what I really love about what you're seeing here is that you can see someone on the SSMS team interact with a community member named Sal Play. And basically what happens is he says, hey, I want to know more, about the version on the splash screen. And then the Microsoft guy says, hey, I agree. So I went ahead and added that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little party icon. And this is amazing. I mean, think of the Microsoft from just a few years ago compared to this now. The transparency is there, the interaction is there, and this community feeling is just really exciting to me, which is why I sound excited. There are a bunch of other channels as well. As you can see here, there are 45 channels. If for those of you who are interested in SQL Server, there is a PowerShell help channel where we talk about PowerShell and we give help. And then there are also a couple other PowerShell-centric channels. Here we have DBA reports. We have DBA tools. We're huge fans of the Party Parrot. And in addition, there is another channel called SQL PSX that you can join that does revolve around PowerShell. You can also join us at sqlps.io/SSMS, where we talk about SQL Server Management Studio improvements. As we've discussed before, you can also join us at sqlps.io/Slack. There are a bunch of SQL PowerShell-centric channels. You can also follow us on Twitter. I created an open source Twitter bot that's powered by PowerShell. You can find it on GitHub. It's called Closed as Fixed. And this Twitter bot follows all of the SQL Server Connect items that have been marked as closed or resolved as fixed on Twitter. It's a party. Go ahead and join us. Thank you so much for taking the time out to watch us today. It's been a pleasure, and au revoir from Belgium and America.